You know, it's fascinating how often people misunderstand avoidant partners. When they walk away from someone who cared deeply for them, it looks like they've finally gotten the freedom they always wanted. To the anxious ex, it seems like the avoidant never cared, like they rejected love and moved on without a second thought. But here's the truth: avoidants often end up missing the very person they pushed away. And not just missing them casually, but in a way that feels confusing and sometimes overwhelming to them. Why does this happen? It happens because an avoidant doesn't usually leave due to a lack of feelings. They leave because closeness triggers a fear of losing themselves. They interpret love as a threat to their independence, so they create distance. But here's the twist. Once the anxious ex is no longer there to provide that steady stream of affection, reassurance, and emotional energy, the avoidant feels the absence. They notice the silence where once there was warmth. At first, the avoidant might feel relieved, like they escaped pressure, but relief fades. What lingers is the realization that this person who loved them so openly is no longer in their life. And because avoidants often struggle to access their emotions in real time, it's only in hindsight that they begin to recognize the depth of what they lost. That's when the missing starts. What they miss is not just the anxious partner's presence, it's the devotion, the way they felt valued, the way the anxious person created an emotional anchor. That level of care is rare, and when it's gone, it leaves a hole that casual flings or distractions can't fill. But here's the part you, as the anxious ex, need to remember. Being missed does not equal being chosen. An avoidant may miss you, but unless they've done the work to confront their fears, missing you isn't the same as being ready to love you in the way you deserve. The power is in understanding that you were not too much, you were exactly enough. Their rejection was about their own limitations, not your worth. So if you've ever wondered whether the avoidant who rejected you now thinks of you, the answer is often yes. They do, but the real question isn't whether they miss you. It's whether you're ready to choose yourself and only allow love that feels safe, consistent, and reciprocal. That's where your strength lies. When an avoidant ends a relationship with an anxious partner, the world often assumes that they never cared or that their departure was a final statement about the lack of love in the bond. But the truth is much more complex. Avoidants are not immune to attachment, affection, or the memory of deep emotional bonds. In fact, many times they end up missing the anxious ex more than they ever expected. This is because what they walked away from wasn't a lack of connection, but rather an overwhelming abundance of it, which they didn't know how to manage at the time. When that connection is gone, the avoidant feels its absence in very real and tangible ways. At first, they might feel a rush of relief. The anxious partner often craves closeness, reassurance, and intimacy, which can make an avoidant feel suffocated or pressured. For the avoidant, stepping away seems like reclaiming their independence. In those early days, they may convince themselves that leaving was the right choice, that they needed space, and that they'll finally feel free. But the irony is that once the anxious partner is no longer there, once the texts stop arriving and the warmth of consistent affection fades, the avoidant begins to sense something missing in their world. That gap is often sharp and uncomfortable. What they start to miss is not just the person themselves, but the unique energy the anxious partner brought into their life. The anxious ex often provides a steady flow of love, reassurance, and loyalty. They notice small details, they reach out often, and they show up emotionally in ways that make their partner feel valued, even if the avoidant had trouble receiving it in the moment. When that source of validation disappears, the avoidant begins to feel the emptiness of its absence. Suddenly, the quiet feels too quiet, the independence feels lonely, and the attention they once pushed away now seems precious in hindsight. Another layer of this dynamic is that avoidants are often disconnected from their own emotions in real time. They might not register how meaningful the anxious partner's efforts were until much later. It's only with distance and silence that the depth of care becomes clear. That delayed realization is what makes them miss their ex so strongly. While the anxious partner may have spent the relationship longing for reassurance, the avoidant only realizes the depth of the love after it's gone. This delayed processing makes the missing feel even more intense because it's combined with regret or confusion. And it's not just about love, it's about rarity. Not everyone offers the kind of dedication that an anxious person does. Their consistent effort, emotional availability, and even their persistence in trying to make the relationship work are not easily found elsewhere. When the avoidant enters new connections, they may quickly see that others do not invest with the same level of intensity. This contrast makes them long for the unique devotion they once had but rejected. So when an avoidant misses an anxious ex, it's not random. It is a reflection of recognizing the depth of what was lost, something that, in their fear of closeness, they couldn't fully appreciate in the moment. What once felt like pressure now looks like love. What once felt overwhelming now feels rare. And that recognition is why avoidants often miss the very person they once pushed away. When an avoidant walks away from a relationship, the anxious partner often interprets it as proof that they weren't loved or valued enough. It feels like rejection at its rawest level, and it is easy to believe that the avoidant's decision was rooted in a lack of genuine feelings. But the truth is usually very different. More often than not, the avoidant does feel deeply, but those feelings become entangled with their fear of losing independence. They are not rejecting the anxious partner's love. They are rejecting the overwhelming emotions that intimacy stirs within them. For someone with avoidant tendencies, closeness can feel like a threat. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability stirs fears of being controlled, consumed, or trapped. While the anxious partner sees love as a safe harbor, the avoidant may interpret that same closeness as a storm pressing in on their sense of freedom. The anxious partner's requests for reassurance or consistency, which come from a place of love, can be misread by the avoidant as demands or pressure. To cope, the avoidant distances themselves, not because they don't care, but because they are trying to protect their autonomy. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships between anxious and avoidant individuals. From the outside, it looks like the avoidant is cold, detached, or uninterested. But beneath that exterior is often someone who feels emotions so strongly that they don't know how to manage them. Pushing away their partner is a way to regulate that intensity, even though it causes pain for both sides. Their withdrawal is less about a lack of desire for love and more about an inability to navigate it without feeling engulfed. The tragedy here is that the anxious partner usually takes this rejection personally. They see the avoidant's retreat as confirmation that they were too much, or that their love was not enough. But if you look deeper, you can see that the avoidant is running from themselves, not from the anxious partner. They are rejecting the fear of dependency, not the person who offered them love. In fact, that love often means more to them than they admit, which is why so many avoidants later feel the loss so acutely. Understanding this distinction is crucial for healing. When the anxious partner realizes that the avoidance withdrawal was about fear rather than lack of affection, it reframes the story. It becomes clear that the rejection was not a reflection of their value, but of the avoidant's limitations in managing intimacy. This perspective is liberating because it allows the anxious ex to release the heavy burden of self-blame. Ironically, avoidants may find themselves longing for the very closeness they once resisted. Once the relationship ends, the absence of love does not erase their feelings, it only strips away the triggers that caused them to pull back. In that calmer space, the depth of what they felt becomes undeniable, and missing the anxious ex becomes almost inevitable. What they once ran from is revealed in hindsight as the very thing they truly valued. When an avoidant ends a relationship with an anxious partner, their initial reaction is often one of relief. They feel as though they've finally broken free from the weight of expectations, requests for reassurance, and the intimacy that made them feel cornered. To them, leaving can feel like a breath of fresh air, as though they've escaped a pressure they didn't know how to handle. But relief, as powerful as it may feel in the moment, is fleeting. It never lasts because it is based on avoidance rather than resolution. Once the dust settles and the immediate tension fades, the absence begins to make itself known in ways that the avoidant cannot ignore. That absence is not simply about missing a person, it is about missing the emotional atmosphere that came with them. The anxious partner often brings a unique kind of warmth, presence, and reliability that lingers long after they're gone. They check in, they remember small details, they reach out just to make sure everything feels okay. They create a sense of stability and connection, even if the avoidant found it overwhelming at the time. When all of that suddenly disappears, it leaves a void. At first, that void is quiet, but as time passes, the quiet begins to feel like emptiness. It is in this emptiness that the avoidant starts to feel the longing. They realize that the things they once resisted are the very things they now crave. The constant messages that once felt suffocating are now missed because they represented care. The desire for closeness that once felt demanding now feels like devotion. What they once interpreted as pressure was, in truth, love in action, and when that love is gone, it cannot be easily replaced. The absence magnifies what was once taken for granted, and the avoidant begins to see the relationship from a completely different perspective. Another aspect of this longing comes from contrast. When avoidants move on and interact with new people, they may notice that not everyone offers the same kind of consistent attention and affection. The anxious partner's depth of investment is not something commonly found. Many others they encounter may be more casual, more distant, or less emotionally available. That difference becomes stark, and it highlights just how much the anxious ex contributed to their emotional world. It is often through this contrast that the avoidant realizes the rare value of what they had. What makes this even more intense is that avoidants tend to process emotions on a delay. While the anxious partner feels everything immediately and intensely, the avoidant often suppresses or disconnects from their feelings until later. So when the relationship ends, it may take weeks or months before they begin to truly feel the loss. By then, the anxious partner may have already moved forward in their healing journey, but the avoidant is only just starting to recognize the depth of the absence. That lag in emotional processing means their longing can feel even sharper because it arrives unexpectedly, long after they believed they had escaped. In the end, what begins as relief almost always transforms into longing. Relief fades because it was never about the person. It was about escaping discomfort. But the love, care, and consistency of the anxious partner leave behind a presence that is felt even in their absence. That realization is why the avoidant often ends up missing what they once believed they could live without. Being missed and being chosen are two very different things, and this is where many anxious ex-partners get caught in a painful loop. When an avoidant reaches out after a breakup, or when you hear that they've been thinking about you, it's tempting to believe that it means they are ready to step back into the relationship and love you differently this time. But missing you is not the same as being ready to choose you. Missing someone reflects a longing for what felt good, comfortable, or validating, while choosing someone requires readiness, commitment, and the courage to face the fears that made them run in the first place. An avoidant may deeply miss the way you cared for them, the way you checked in consistently, and the way you made them feel like they mattered. They may miss the warmth of your presence and the stability of knowing that someone was always emotionally invested in them. But missing those qualities doesn't necessarily mean they are prepared to offer what you need in return. Often, the avoidant still hasn't worked through the fears and defenses that cause them to pull away. Their longing is more about filling the void than creating a genuine foundation for change. This is why so many anxious partners feel confused when they hear from an avoidant after a long silence. The messages, the sudden calls, or the unexpected reminders of affection can spark hope that perhaps things will be different. But what's really happening is that the avoidant is soothing their own discomfort by reaching back toward what once felt good. It doesn't automatically translate into an ability to stay close, provide consistency, or commit to emotional intimacy. Without doing the deeper work on themselves, they are likely to repeat the same cycle, moving toward you when they feel lonely and pulling back when closeness becomes too much again. The difference between missing and choosing lies in growth. Choosing you would mean that the avoidant has confronted their fears, learned how to sit with intimacy, and developed the capacity to offer the same consistency you gave to them. It would mean they can stay, not just visit, they can lean in, not just retreat. Until that transformation happens, their missing is just a sign of regret, nostalgia, or a temporary desire for comfort. It may be flattering, but it doesn't guarantee the stability you need for a healthy relationship. For the anxious ex, this is an important truth to hold on to. You are not wrong for wanting to be chosen instead of simply missed. Being missed means you mattered, but being chosen means you are valued in action, not just in memory. You deserve love that doesn't just remember you fondly in the quiet moments, but shows up for you consistently in real life. The avoidance longing might be real, but unless it is matched by readiness to grow and commit, it remains incomplete. Recognizing this difference is how you protect yourself from falling back into old patterns and instead open the door for love that truly meets your needs. One of the most damaging beliefs an anxious partner carries after being rejected by an avoidant is the thought that they were simply too much. Too emotional, too needy, too expressive, too intense. That self-criticism becomes a heavy burden, making them question their worth and replay every moment of the relationship as if their love itself was the problem. But the reality is very different. The avoidance rejection was not a reflection of you being too much. It was a reflection of their own limitations in receiving, sustaining, and reciprocating intimacy. What you gave was not excessive. It was love expressed in your natural way, and it was exactly enough. Avoidants often misinterpret the anxious partner's desire for closeness. Where you saw your actions as care, they may have perceived them as pressure. Where you wanted reassurance, they may have interpreted it as control. But this misinterpretation has more to do with their fear of dependence than with the quality of your love. To them, closeness feels dangerous because it threatens their sense of independence. So when they pull away, it's not because your love was unworthy, but because they lack the tools to manage the vulnerability that intimacy demands. When you understand this, the narrative shifts. Instead of carrying the blame, you begin to see that your worth is not defined by their ability to embrace it. Imagine giving a gift to someone who isn't ready to receive it. Does that make the gift less valuable? Of course not. It only means that the recipient wasn't in a place to appreciate it fully. Your love, your loyalty, and your openness were gifts. If they couldn't hold them, that speaks to where they are in their own emotional journey, not to your value as a partner. It's important to recognize, too, that the very qualities you fear made you too much are the same qualities that will make you deeply cherished by someone who is ready. Your attentiveness, your commitment, your ability to feel deeply, these are not flaws, they are strengths. They create intimacy, foster connection, and build the kind of relationship most people long for. In the wrong hands, those qualities may be overwhelming, but in the right hands, they are treasured. The avoidance rejection was not a verdict on your worthiness of love. It was a mirror reflecting their struggle with closeness. This means that the story you tell yourself after the breakup matters. If you continue to carry the belief that you are too much, you will shrink yourself in future relationships, hiding your natural capacity for love out of fear of being rejected again. But if you rewrite the story, you can step into future connections knowing that what you bring to the table is valuable. You can see that you weren't too much, you were exactly enough, and someone else's inability to receive it does not make it less powerful. At its core, this realization is freeing. It allows you to separate your identity from their rejection and reclaim your self-worth. You can stop measuring your value through the lens of someone who couldn't embrace intimacy and instead measure it by your own heart's capacity to love. Because in the end, love is never too much for the person who is ready for it. It is only ever enough. And so, when we step back and look at it all, we see that the avoidance rejection was never about a lack of love from you, but about their fear of closeness, their delayed recognition of value, and their inability to choose what they truly missed once it was gone. You were never too much, you were simply more than they could handle at the time, and that truth frees you from carrying the weight of blame. The power lies in knowing your worth, choosing yourself, and opening your heart only to love that shows up fully and consistently. Thank you for giving me the space to share these reflections with you today, and thank you for listening with such openness. May you walk away reminded that your love is not a burden, but a gift that deserves to be treasured.